Joe and Hunter Biden allegedly coerced a foreign national to pay them $10 million in bribes, according to people familiar with the investigation into the FBI's investigation into a Republicans' much-hyped FD 1023 report. This is according to The Federalist. Early this week, Senator Chuck Grassley revealed a foreign national identified by The Federalist as Mykola Zlochevsky, the founder of Burisma, reportedly possessed 17 recordings, quote, implicating the Bidens in a pay-to-play scandal. While 15 of the audio recordings consisted of calls between Zlochevsky and Hunter Biden, 2 were with Joe Biden.
Zlochevsky reportedly explained the steps he took to avoid being caught, and then said he never paid, quote, the big guy directly, and it would take about 10 years to unravel the multiple paths the payments took. Meanwhile, the New York Post reporter Stephen Nelson asked Biden yesterday why the Ukraine informant file alleging bribery called him, quote, the big guy back in June of 2020. Let's watch his response.
Why did the Ukraine FBI informant file refer to you as the big guy? Why is that term particularly applied? Thank you very much. Thanks, guys.
Right, that's a dumb question.
So 17 recordings being in possession is very interesting. The idea that Joe Biden was on the phone directly with the founder of Burisma, all of this extremely interesting. The reporting originally made it unclear if the vice president, now president, was directly involved. Sounds like he was. So this is a bit of a bombshell report. We don't know anything about the informant. It sounds like there was one informant from within the FBI that was familiar with the matter. But this reporting is pretty damning if true.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the culmination of lots of investigation from the House Oversight Committee. And this particular file was very interesting because originally the FBI basically pretended that they didn't have it, that it didn't exist. A member of the House Oversight Committee, one of the Republicans on that committee, apparently had already seen it or been made aware of it. And at that point, the FBI's bluff was called and they had to eventually provide the document under threat of subpoena. So it took some finagling to even get access to this. But basically what these documents allege is that not only was there a confidential source who was rated by the FBI as highly credible, alleging that there was this bribery scheme involving Biden and Burisma, but now also that the confidential informant supposedly had, or rather the Burisma official supposedly had these tapes directly implicating Hunter and Joe Biden, which would be, of course, irrefutable evidence that this bribery scheme did in fact take place. The Republicans are cautioning that they don't know for sure if the tapes even exist, only that this individual claimed to have them. But if they do exist, I mean, that's, as you said, a bombshell. I mean, there's really no other way to put it. This would suggest that everything that was on the Hunter Biden laptop regarding Hunter's getting, $30,000 a month from Burisma to sit on the board despite having no experience in the energy field, and then the top prosecutor looking into corruption at Burisma getting fired while Joe Biden was vice president and directly in charge of handling those matters with Ukraine. It all starts to make sense, right? It seems like all of the threads are slowly connecting.
It's certainly nothing new that we have members of the American government that are very high up that have connections with multinational corporations with foreign bases. However, what is interesting about this, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, is that this could be an opportunity for us to establish some anti-corruption laws in this respect, or some way to move forward in a democratic way to prevent situations like this from arising going forward. I think even if you're someone who supported Joe Biden as a candidate, you consider yourself to be a Democrat, it's a good precedent to set legally in the country to establish strict regulations from a president ever being able to do that. Moreover, it seems the FBI has demonstrated they are not equipped to handle situations like this. They've demonstrated that time and again. And there are many other countries that have anti-corruption organizations within their government to investigate situations precisely like this one. The FBI doesn't seem that they've ever been particularly inclined to investigate those holding the highest public office in the United States. And so perhaps we need another division. But I think there's a stigma around addressing, okay, we need an anti-corruption division of our government. And we don't want to believe we're some kind of corrupt banana republic. The United States only establishes banana republics through coups so we can exploit their land and labor, of course. We don't have one of those at home. We don't have corruption at home. Of course not. But I think this is really the political moment to establish that, even if you believe the Republicans are acting in their political interest with an election coming. This is still something good to have a good government.
Right, and it feels like we're not getting it, or it's taking so long because so many politicians are corrupt. They don't want all of this to fall back on them, because if the president of the United States can go down for a bribery scheme or some kind of corruption where he was trading influence and access for money from foreign related businesses, particularly ones in China, which is the U.S.'s #1 geopolitical enemy right now, then what's going to happen to them? I mean, we talked about this on the show last week, the fact that Jared Kushner had made tons of money from Saudi Arabia after helping to negotiate the Abraham Accords. We know that all of these politicians, particularly Nancy Pelosi, have like near perfect stock records that are even better than some of the top investors in the world. They managed to somehow get every call right and continue to enrich themselves over and over again while they're in office. So unfortunately, if the establishment is involved, we're not going to see massive anti-corruption movement because they don't want those dominoes to fall into their lap.
That's absolutely true. And I think it's important that we note that it's not just being reported that there were calls between Biden and folks in Ukraine related to Burisma, Joe Biden, not Hunter. So Joe Biden being involved in those calls, but also it's alleged by this person who's close with the matter that it was a $10 million bribe, but 5 went to Hunter and 5 went to Joe. I think that's really important to point out here. But back to your point that you were just making, Amber, I hear a lot. We just need to get money out of politics. We just need to overturn Citizens United. We need to make it so that we can't have these huge dollar donations and dark money going into political elections and campaigns. And that's just not the extent of corruption we have in the United States. That's not the extent to how people with wealth and power use their money in ways that manipulate our democratic process. When they have so much control over media and what folks in media are saying and what advertisements people are getting on their Facebook, when they have control over what's being run on television, and you have these huge conglomerates running cable news, even local news, the extent of control people have over the narrative, people with a lot of money and a lot of influence, that matters, I think, almost more than any money that can be spent with its limitations on a political campaign. There has to be intense reporting done on that. There's intense limitations on that. But when it comes to running media companies or having bribes with multinational corporations, there's a lot more corruption just because we have a concentration of wealth, not because we don't have the laws necessary to regulate that wealth from being donated directly to political campaigns. The problem of corruption's much deeper than that in the United States.
Yeah, I want to go back to this reporting on Biden being the big guy again, because I think this is important in terms of the timing of that statement. So this Burisma official apparently referred to Biden as the big guy back in June of 2020. And that was well before the contents of Hunter Biden's laptop were reported, in which he has an email on his laptop referring to setting aside 10% for the big guy from one of his foreign business deals. And at the time, there was a lot of speculation. Obviously, is the big guy Joe Biden? And it seemed to be the case, but there was not really confirmation. Now we have an independent source also referring to him as the big guy before that laptop ever came out, before anyone saw that email. So it further confirms the email on the Hunter Biden laptop about setting aside money for Joe as well. So that's sort of an, I think, underappreciated thread in this latest document that the Republicans have found from the FBI.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, and it very well could be the link of Joe Biden and these folks and these documents. But I also know that a lot of people say, oh, it's the big guy, referring to like their father, their friend, what's up, big guy? So there are a lot of people who could be the big guy when it comes to these business dealings. But I do think like they were trying to use some kind of phrase instead of directly implicating Joe Biden But I don't know if this would hold up in a court of law. I used to work in an intellectual property law office, and if something was just like a common phrase, you couldn't trademark it because it's just something people say a lot. People do say the big guy a lot, especially in situations like this. So I'm not sure that convinces me directly, but it does seem to be a very strange coincidence in this context that it was in the June documents and was repeated.
Yeah, I mean, if someone can come on the record confirming that the big guy in the email is Joe Biden, then that's definitely big trouble for the Biden family. I find the media reaction to all of this so fascinating, too. I was just looking around last night at who's been reporting on this latest trove of documents, and all of the headlines from the mainstream media are about how the Republicans have nothing on Biden and their investigation is falling apart. So it's pretty mind-blowing to see the difference in how this is being covered by, I think, honest people and people who are more interested in covering for the establishment. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with more Rising after this.